Richard Syrett, welcome to the Russell Scott Show.
Hey, Russell. What a pleasure. Thank you for asking.
Richard Syrett is the longtime part-time host of legendary program Coast to Coast AM. He's also the host of the longtime show The Conspiracy Show, which airs every Sunday night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Zoomer Radio, AM 740, based out of Toronto, Canada. Richard, Steve Allen said, radio is the theater of the mind. Television is the theater of the mindless. I apologize for asking such a pedestrian question, but how did you get so interested in the medium that you decided to work in radio?
And Fred Allen says radio is the treadmill to oblivion. How did I get involved in radio? Probably like many things or most things in my life, kind of by accident. I had actually intended on television documentaries, or thought I had, fresh out of college. I had interned at a TV documentary house, and they produced a couple of documentaries, and I had interned and decided, wow, this is cool. I'd like to do this. And then I got a call from a fellow graduate at CFRB 1010, which is the big 50,000 watt blowtorch station in Toronto that's been on the air since 1927. It's a heritage station, and it had a lineup like the 1927 Yankees. The morning show, Wally Crowder had been on the air. I think he set the world record. I think he's in the Guinness Book of World Records, longest serving morning man in radio history. Andy Barry, Ed Needham, all these. John Oakley was the overnight guy at that time. And they were looking for a call screener, and that was in the summer of '92, and that was the beginning. And then I became John Oakley's story producer. He had an overnight show, and then he dropped down to 7 to 10. And I ended up sort of following him around the clock, the different day parts at the radio station. And in the late '90s, actually 2000, the program director asked me if I'd like to do a show Sunday nights. So I had my first turn behind the microphone, and that's been really the trajectory ever since. I still produce my own shows, so I still have a hand in producing. But it's been a 28-year love affair with radio. I've done some television as well. I had a TV show for 4 seasons, also called The Conspiracy Show. And it's fun, traveling around and so forth. But the immediacy of a live audience, especially the late night audience, you can't beat it.
So you prefer radio over television?
I prefer the money in television.
And I remember that program.
You're the one.
Yes, I'm the one. I do remember it, though.
But radio, it's just, well, I'm sitting here, in my little home studio, my studio beneath the stairs, and the technology now is incredible. I can do coast to coast from here. I do my Sunday show from here now, of course, as we're all working from home. I could be sitting here in my boxer shorts and my feather boa, for all you know. So that's the wonderful thing about radio. It's so portable, and television is so compartmentalized, and hurry up and wait. And there's so much, there's the pre-production and all of that stuff. Wait for the lighting and yada, yada, yada. So radio, flip a switch and just go and tell stories. So yeah, radio, I think I was made for radio. I have a face for radio. So, I think I prefer radio.
I liken it to like a horror film. Some are graphic and you see everything on it. Then there's the Hitchcockian stuff, where it's psychological. And that's how I kind of look at radio. It's all in the mind.
Yes, yeah. It's I worked with a guy who called it the electronic bonfire, and I like that. It is very communal, and of course, my mother's generation, they would literally gather around the radio and watch the radio. and its delivery system has changed, and they've been declaring the death of radio since, television, and it's still here. And now your iPhone is your radio. So the delivery system keeps changing, and in another 10 years, it'll just be an earpiece that you stick in your ear, or Bluetooth or whatever, and that'll be radio. So as long as there's an innate human need for storytelling, and so I believe radio will be here forever.
But terrestrial radio, not necessarily.
No.
It'll all move online.
Sure. Or it'll be in the ether. The technology is becoming miniaturized and invisible. So I can't even, who could predict, what it'll look like? It'll be a little grain of sand or something in that you insert into your skin. I don't know.
Elon Musk will implant it into your brain.
No doubt. Yes. If anyone's going to do it, it'll be Elon. Yes.
How did you get the gig at Coast to Coast?
I have to thank my lovely bride, the mighty Aphrodite. She said, she had read something that the vice president of talk at Premier Radio, which owns Coast, was from Montreal. And I've forgotten his name. It was something Oliver. Anyway, I should remember that. It's important. It's a milestone, and yet I've forgotten it. So she said, you should send him a package. And I said, oh, come on, Coast to Coast, are you kidding? And which is often my response. She's always having me, reach further and try harder, and which is one of the things I love about her. So she sort of dragged me kicking and screaming to that, and we put a package together, and we sent it off. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, the phone rang, and it was this gentleman from Premier, and he said, George Norrie's taking next Friday off to celebrate his daughter's birthday. How would you like to fill in? How would you like to fill in? And practically fell off my chair. And that was in April of 2009. And at that time, AM 640 was the Toronto affiliate. So I had worked there previously, but wasn't working there at that time in 2009. However, they provided a studio for me, a little broom closet, to do the show. And I won't say I knocked it out of the park, but I thought it was a serviceable stand-up double, considering it was my first time. And anyway, they didn't call me back actually for quite some time. It was January 2014. Lisa Lyon called me, and she said, hey, remember us? And I said, of course. So ever since January of 2014, I've been kind of a regular fill-in, doing usually 3 shows a month. So it's often a Saturdays, maybe a couple of Saturdays and a Sunday, or sometimes it's a Friday, Saturday, followed by a couple of weeks later, I'll do another Sunday or something like that. So that's typically how it works. And I just love it. My God, I always say this when people ask me, what was it like, getting that call? And I say it was like getting called up to the Yankees. Not that Toronto is the minor leagues. It's a major, it's like the 4th or 5th largest radio market in North America. But just because of the legacy and the history of the program, you mentioned Art Bell, to be associated with that.
Did you ever work with Art Bell, or?
No, he had
moved to the Philippines already at that point.
Retired, moved to the Philippines, moved back again, had retired for the 4th or 5th time. So I have been to Pahrump, but I unfortunately I never had occasion to meet Art, who was had that kind of voice. You could listen to him read the phone book, and it would be engrossing.
You consider your show to be alternative media?
It's funny because it is, but it's also mainstream. I've always been working the late night overnight. That's where the show works best, with that type of late night audience. But it's, and I call out the mainstream media a lot, and I complain about the MSM a lot, but I am also working on the mainstream media. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy. I'm doing alternative type content on the mainstream, and I think that sort of has been a little bit of my stock and trade, is making the fringe more mainstream. I think because what I do is, or try to do, is take more of a journalistic type approach. Not that I'm a journalist, but try and employ some of the journalistic standards. Show me the evidence, that kind of thing, and also at the same time provide a very respectful platform for people to come on and talk about whatever. And I'll go just about anywhere, with a few notable exceptions. But if someone wants to come on and argue about the flat Earth, bring them on. Why not? I think I've tried to bridge that gap between the alternative and the mainstream. I don't know how successful I've been, but
You must feel shackled with how far you can go down the rabbit hole. If it's your own private show on your own network, you can do whatever you want.
On Coast to Coast, I'm definitely working for someone else. And I also feel, because I'm a Canadian speaking primarily, they have obviously a large audience in Canada, but their meat and potatoes is in the US. And the show has, kind of an American, all the references are American and so forth. So I feel, as a Canadian sitting in the air chair, that I'm a bit of an interloper. I don't feel restricted really in the sense of the content. That's I've learned one of the fundamental differences between our two countries. They really take free speech seriously. And up here it's, please don't offend. But the conspiracy show, that's my show. I don't work for Zoomer Radio. They buy the show. And I have about 38 affiliates across North America. But the restriction here is, try not to offend, really. I will not entertain, Holocaust denial or any of that nonsense. Now in the United States, they might, but I just, up here, first of all, the sensitivity is such that it's just, you can't do that on the radio, and nor would I. I love I'm an Israel right or wrong kind of guy, and I take some heat for that. It's just, that's one of the few places I will not go. Other than that, as long as, people are not promoting hate, I'll entertain it in a respectful, hopefully rational, analytical kind of way. But some of it is, let's face it, it's primarily for entertainment purposes. Nobody gets hurt talking about Bigfoot, and a lot of the UFO stuff. Some of the others, when we get into political subterfuge, it can get kind of dicey. So you have to tread lightly.
The way conspiracy shows operate from the way it used to be to now, that's the way it's going, right? We stopped talking about Bigfoot and UFOs, and it went more to the New World Order type stuff, and it seems heavily political now.
A lot of it does. I try and, it's almost like when you're eating a 5 or 6 course meal, and in between you might have a spoonful of sorbet or something to cleanse the palate. I feel the need, just for my own sanity, and I hope I have kind of a sense of what the audience and my listeners want, and when they've had enough of something and they need a break. So I've been serving up a pretty steady diet on COVID on my podcast and on my radio show for weeks and weeks, and then I just decide, okay, I need a break. I think maybe they need a break. Even if they want more, I need the break if I'm going to survive to fight another day. So we're going to talk UFOs and Bible prophecy. Or we're going to do an hour on Marshall McLuhan and communication theory or something like that. So, yeah, but you're right. Well, given the times, I mean, especially the last 4 years, everything is political. You're wearing a mask, you're a Democrat. You're not wearing a mask, you must be a Republican.
I'm not going to give you a break today because that's what I want to ask you about COVID and lockdowns.
That's all right. Bring it on.
Yeah, we talk about the mainstream media. I certainly notice here in Canada, the CBC has devolved into some radicalized liberal propaganda arm. In the States, CNN produces the worst of it. That's not to say that Fox or MSNBC are any better. Do you feel that the media is pushing a propaganda narrative with COVID-19 and it's not as bad as people say it is?
Yes, is the first part. They're always pushing a political narrative. I think they always have in some measure, but I think it's become amplified since Bad Orange Man descended the escalator, and that began immediately. They were trying to impeach the moment he had his hand on the Bible. Are they making more of this? Well, part of it is driven by fear. Fear is a great motivator, and in some cases, it's not an intended consequence. But it is motivated by fear, and politicians also are motivated by fear. So here in Ontario, they just extended the emergency until the end of the month, and this is not the guy that we voted for, the Premier Doug Ford. He was Ontario is open for business and free markets and personal liberty and responsibility and so forth. And now it seems he has sort of thrown in the towel and is just listening to these public health officials who are, not elected. They're not accountable to anyone. And I think part of it again is he's afraid. If God forfend, someone dies after he opens the economy back up, the media will be all over him.
Yeah, the blood's on his hands all of a sudden.
Yes, and the media has, they've been on him so hard. Not as bad as Trump, but the unions and the public sector unions and the opposition parties and the media have been on him from the get-go. That now all of a sudden he's cast as this almost like this wartime president, and everyone's sort of rallying around the flag. And I think he's kind of breathed a sigh of relief. It's like, wow, I'm actually liked and loved now, and that's kind of like a drug. So does he want to? He doesn't want to go back, to like swimming upstream like the salmon and fighting all the time. So I think he's kind of enjoying that role, but he's just totally caved to the what we call the Tories in his own party. He's listening to them. They have his ear, and the public health officials and so forth. So, but I personally believe that this has been way overblown. Not to discount that people are dying, the elderly are dying. We should have poured all our resources as soon as we figured this out into the long-term care facilities and retirement homes, because they are 90% of the they're taking the brunt of it. And, now we know that children, for example, are not the super spreaders that we were told. That was based on one study out of Germany, which was roundly debunked even when it came out. And now people have sort of recognized that. And this bad data and these bad disease models, this is all our policy has been based on this. And we've cratered our economy based on horrible models. This Neil Ferguson guy who never gets it right from the Imperial College, he's the guy that said mad cow disease was going to kill 200,000 people in the UK. It killed 157 to date. And there are other examples. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but time after time after time, he gets it wrong. And we all suffer because of that. And then now we're learning that out of Italy, something like 96% of the people that died, and most of them were in northern Italy, and most of them were 80 years old plus, 96% of them had comorbidities. And we're also learning about the data in the United States, 100,000 dead. By what order of magnitude has that number been padded? That's the big question. It's not 100,000. We know they've incentivized diagnosing people with COVID. So if you're admitted to a hospital, Medicare, for any other reason, Medicare pays a hospital $4,000. If it's diagnosed as COVID-19, the hospital receives $13,000. If you're put on a ventilator, the hospital receives $39,000. So I'm not blaming doctors, but nobody can tell me that administrators in a hospital aren't going to take advantage of that. And we know that doctors are being pressured. They're telling the world they're being pressured by their state health boards to diagnose people or sign off on the cause of death as COVID-19, even if they didn't die from COVID-19, but they died with COVID-19. So I don't believe the 100,000 for a moment. This is the world that we live in. If you don't obey the orders, there's hell to pay. So, and a few doctors have spoken out about it, but the vast majority remain silent. And I'm not going to, make a judgment on that, except that, and even Dr. Birx, who's on the White House task force for coronavirus, told us back in April. She said, we are diagnosing COVID-19 deaths very liberally, she said. And if you die with COVID-19, we're counting that as dying from COVID-19. So again, how many of these people are in the last stages of their life and they die from whatever? How many people? There's 162,000, I believe I read, 162,000 Americans die of lower respiratory disease in the United States every year. How many of those 162,000 have been moved over to the COVID-19 column?
John McAfee likes to point out that 9 out of 10 people put on ventilators die.
Yeah.
Once you get put on a ventilator, you have outsourced your body's own ability to produce oxygen. I'm not a doctor, so what can I say? But it seems like maybe the ventilators are doing more harm than good in certain circumstances.
I've talked to a number of doctors who have said the exact same thing, that you're hastening death. Because the other thing that you do when you intubate somebody, that's an incredibly stressful, horribly uncomfortable procedure. And so often these people receive a sedation like morphine or something, and that suppresses respiration. So yeah, I think it sounds like it might be the exact opposite of what they should be doing. And then we've also had doctors, and I can't confirm that these are credible claims, but doctors on YouTube saying that they have been ordered to wait for a patient to crash and then put them on a ventilator because there is an intermediary step. I guess they could just put them on pure oxygen, but they're told to wait until they crash, then put them on the ventilator. Crash meaning they're at the point now where they can't breathe on their own. We've just talked about how there's an incentive for hospitals. I mean, they're strapped for cash because of all of these procedures laying off. Imagine, in the midst of a pandemic, hospitals around the country are laying doctors and nurses off. Hospitals are empty. We heard those initial reports, people going into hospitals with their iPhones, and where are all the people? People are afraid to go to the hospital, or they've canceled elective surgery and important screening procedures. So there's an incentive there for the hospitals. The way I look at government agencies, they're like a synthetic beast. Their raison d'etre is to expand and grow. And so consuming, more resources, bigger budgets, hiring more people. I mean, if left unattended, they just become a monster. So that's a motivation. It's just kind of a natural byproduct This is just the way the government agencies are. It's not. If it wasn't a pandemic, it would be something else. If you leave them alone, they'll just grow. You have to until you have to slay this, dragon. For let's see, for authoritarian type minded people, obviously they want to control. They want greater power. They want to surveil. They want to trace and track. They look at China as kind of the blueprint of how they would like to see this world run. Even our own prime minister, gropey blackface, has said that he admired the Chinese dictatorship, and that wasn't some Freudian slip. The people of a particular political persuasion. His father lionized Mao. Our supposed great, one of our great heroes, I think he's on a postage stamp, Dr. Norman Bethune, loved the Chinese government, and the Chinese government loved him. So there are a lot of political leaders that would love to see us move in that direction, social control. And so in many respects, this is kind of a yet another beta test. And every time we have one of these pandemics, and whether it's real or imagined, what was Milton Friedman said, the only way to bring about real change is through a crisis, either real or imagined. And there are certainly elements of this crisis that are real. There is a virus. It is killing a certain vulnerable percentage of the population. So this is the crisis that they've seized upon, and they're gonna see how far they can push us. How long can we keep them locked down before they revolt? And what's it going to take to finally convince, the majority of people to take a vaccine? Will they allow us to insist that they be vaccinated, have a vaccination passport in order to get on a plane? Will they download this app so that we can trace and track them in the name of good health and security? And it's been disappointing to see how quickly many of my fellow countrymen are willing to trade health above liberty. I get attacked on Twitter as a what did someone call me? This was Rich, a right wing, some freedom psycho or something like that. Like, I love freedom too much. Only in Canada.
The riots in the States. Idle hands are the devil's playthings. We had everyone sitting in their homes for the last 3 months doing nothing, and now they're pent up. Is this just timing, or do you feel that this was somewhat orchestrated?
Elements of it certainly are. But poor George Floyd, certainly that was the match, right? And no one can watch that video without being sickened and deeply, deeply disturbed. But I'll say some things that, may not be really popular. Number one, that's not allowed. You can't do that. So yes, he's been charged with third-degree murder, and rightly so. But on the face of it, there's no evidence there that confirms that was an act of racism. And then that may come out. We don't know. It appears that George Floyd and that cop worked together at a nightclub as bouncers. So maybe, who knows? Maybe there's a history there. I don't know. Maybe
this George Floyd knew a lot of people.
Yes.
NFL players, basketball player. I mean, he's not a nobody. No. And he had a very troubled past. He's a violent criminal, but that doesn't excuse what happened. And we're told that he was really genuinely trying to turn his life around. Maybe that's the case. Regardless, it doesn't excuse what happened. What I'm saying is, though, that we don't know yet whether that was an act of racism. What it was an act of police brutality, a horrible policing.
And unfortunately, though, that again, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so people have certain elements, Antifa, the radical left, anarchists, the Democrats, the media have seized upon this. And that was the match. And Antifa was all ready to go with their pallets of bricks and taking explosives across state lines and committing all sorts of felonies and inciting riots. And I mean, this is the sad part, is that you can't attend church, but you can burn them to the ground. You can't sell TVs, but you can smash a window and steal them. Given the pandemic and what's happening. Apparently the pandemic is over.
Yeah, you can go to a protest and not wear a mask.
Yes.
As long as you're protesting.
What's going on has nothing to do with what happened to George Floyd. And here's the other thing. The biggest threat, and these officers, yeah, there are bad cops and they need to be rooted out and dealt with. And by and large, they are. The biggest threat to the black communities living in inner cities are not cops. It's crime. And unfortunately, the black community has a crime problem, and they know this. And there's a long, complicated reason for it. Breakdown of the family and the Great Society, which was perhaps well-intended back in the 60s, but was a disaster. It destroyed the fabric of the nuclear family in the black community. 80% fatherlessness in the black community. And a number of black leaders will tell you this. In the United States, former leaders of the NAACP, when asked, what is the greatest risk or threat to young black men? Is it racist cops? Is it white racists? Or is it fatherlessness? And they will tell you it's the latter. When it comes to the police, one government agency I think that truly believes that Black Lives Matter are the police. Back in the 90s, there was this tremendous, and this, I'm not a fan of Bill Clinton, but certain things happened during the 90s that he has to be credited for. And this is one of them. This sort of this revolution in inner city policing. They poured all sorts of resources in, and they saved tens of thousands of black lives because, unfortunately, black on black murder is a huge problem. And they saved all those lives. Now that's at risk of all going away because now police are afraid to engage in the inner cities because they're accused of being racist and murderers and so forth. So we need to really have a serious and honest discussion about this issue, and it's not about paying reparations for slavery. I hear the head of say that the Black Entertainment television program, or BET, I guess it's called, wants $15 trillion or something in reparations. In the United States, they paid the reparations. It was called the Civil War. Blood was shed to end slavery. They didn't invent slavery, but they really were on the forefront of ending it. We can't forget that. But we have to address black on black crime, and we have to repair the family unit. It's not an easy answer. It's we're not going to solve this by paying reparations. We're not going to solve it by throwing bricks through windows. That's the honest discussion that nobody wants to have. They say, "Oh, we have to have an honest discussion," and that begins with white people apologizing for slavery and so forth. No, we need to repair the damage to the family, and we have to figure out how to do that. That's beyond my pay grade. It's easy to destroy a family. It's much more difficult to put it back together.
We have the same issue in Canada with the First Nations people.
Mm-hmm.
More money, is that the answer? It doesn't ever seem to work.
I'd be inclined to rip up the Indian Act and start over, and stop going into reservations and telling people how to fix things. Give them the ability, give them the freedom to fix things for themselves. They know what needs to be done.
Would you cut them off?
Would I cut them off? Boy, I would give them the ability to create their own resources. I mean, that starts with pipelines and bringing them in on the deal. And they want the CBC always parades out a few of these hereditary chiefs, and even they're in the minority among hereditary chiefs. They want these jobs. They want oil and natural gas jobs. They want the pipelines. And these environmentalists come in, and all of a sudden they think they're simpatico because they're wearing a buckskin deer jacket, and they stand in front of the cameras and saying, no more pipelines, and you're destroying Indian land. And then they leave, and they leave in their wake, they leave despair and poverty and a suicide rate, which is such a stain on this country. It's unbelievable. It makes me so angry. So these are capable people, just well educated, industrious. Give them the resources and then leave them alone, and they'll solve their problems. They don't need people coming in from Ottawa telling them how to fix their problem. They need Ottawa to get the hell out, as do most of us.
More of a libertarian approach.
Yeah, more of a, dare I say, I mean, this will get the lefties screaming, free market. Capitalism, people talk about social justice. The greatest vehicle to deliver social justice, and whatever that means, is a free market and free capitalism. That is what is lifting millions and millions and millions of people out of poverty. It's not socialism.
But the free market does need certain regulations.
Yes, it does. There's no question. I'm not talking about, going back to Dickensian England here and, chaining 8-year-olds to the, to the mill and so forth. No, it does. And because corporations don't always act in the best interest of the community, that has to be measured, obviously. I mean, I believe there's a lot of deregulation that has to happen, but obviously we need to make sure that corporations act in the best interests of our people.
Back to the riots, I noticed that the narrative right now is that if you're not anti-racist and actively protesting, then indirectly you're racist. Or Antifa, which is anti-fascism. If you're against Antifa, therefore you must be fascist. Only the Sith deal in absolutes, and it seems that's where we are. You're either with us or against us.
This explains a lot of this facile virtue signaling. What was it yesterday? This blackout on Instagram where you were supposed to post nothing but a black square or something. Okay, do that, and then you're never mind marching on Selma. Just post your little black Instagram square, and you're good for 20 years. It's so facile and so ridiculous. Antifa. I have to laugh. I mean, again, a typical example of projection, the psychological phenomenon known as projection. Whatever the radical left are accusing you of doing, you can pretty much, it's money in the bank. That's what they're doing. They're not anti-fascists. They are the fascists. I mean, look at the flag, for crying out loud. Look what they wear. Look at the way they behave. They have a lot more in common with skinheads and white supremacists than they do with whatever the opposite of that is. They both enjoy a hate of Israel. They both hate freedom of speech. They both hate democracy. They're fascists. It's pure and simple. And why we continue to coddle them. I know why, but and again, the media gives them such a free pass. The media and the Democrats Biden's staffers that are bailing these people out of jail, they are complicit. We have I'm not sure what the body count is now. Most recently, this retired police captain, David Dorn, 77 years old, shot dead in the street for trying to stop someone from looting. I've not heard his name mentioned by Joe Biden or any on the left or any of the other dozen or so now, blacks or whites or whatever color, that are now dead as a result of these violent protesters. They're not protesters. They're the mob. Are we going to see all of their names and faces on the front page tomorrow? I think not.
Where is this all going? If COVID and these riots are a pretext, what's the end game? And why would a government want to shut down its own economy? That always seems counterintuitive.
Well, if the Russian hoax failed and impeachment failed and Ukraine gate failed, the last time they rioted after he got elected. So this time they're figuring we better riot before the next election. So a lot of this in the States, again, not saying that vodka swilling witch Nancy Pelosi created COVID-19 in her bathtub or anything, but she's seizing upon this. The radical left are seizing upon. When I say the Democratic Party, I repeat myself. That's now that's the radical left. That's what it has become. It's not even Joe Biden's party. That's why he's in such a daze. He doesn't know where he is. He's still back in 1984 with Walter Mondale. This is not your father's or your grandfather's Democratic Party. They're Bolsheviks practically. They're willing to scuttle the economy if it's their one last chance to bring down Trump. I mean, they want to tear down and burn the house anyway. They hate Western civilization. The AOC's and her motley crew. They want to tear down the whole damn thing. And so they're quite happy to do that and replace it with their Green New Deal. And then if some of the theories are true that this was in some capacity engineered in Wuhan and in the level 4 there, of course China would. I mean, they've already essentially declared war on the United States, not in so many words, but they have. And so this is the first salvo, perhaps of many, not designed to be. It's not a very lethal disease, but it's virulent and it spreads, quickly and so forth. But the fear is the real contagion. Just all you need to do is, a whisper that there's something out there that could kill, and you have a complicit media and a cadre of public health officials that get their directives from the World Health Organization, which gets its directives from the Communist Chinese Party. And then all of a sudden, economies around the world are being shuttered, and China gets their situation under control and reopens their economy. So mission accomplished.
I just can't believe. I mean, this is the biggest show of influential power the world has ever seen, where practically every nation on Earth has towed the line. I think it's frightening, personally. And to me, this never passed the smell test. Right from the get-go, something stunk in the state of Denmark.
You asked me where it's going, and my God, it's like we're living at the speed of light. I can't even process.
Do you think life will ever go back to normal? They're already pushing the new normal, right?
That is what keeps me up at night, because the economy has been so perhaps irreparably damaged. Or, if it comes back, it could take, who knows? We could be heading into another 10 lost years, like 29 to 39. And I have children who are about to enter high school in September. What do I tell them? I don't know. I'm just kind of holding on and riding this out the best I can, like everybody else, and trying to get through the next day. But again, it seems to me like they're ramping things up, and if it goes away, there'll be another one in a year or two. And again, that'll be another opportunity to push for, further tracing and tracking of individuals and vaccines and controlling movement and so forth. So ultimately, the end game is is, we're all going to be living under the jackboot. I think there's still time, for us to fight back and hopefully what the lessons that we come away with are, if people haven't already figured out that the news they're getting is incredibly distorted, error of omission, the censorship has been incredible. So hopefully people will distrust the major news gathering organizations. Hopefully this will give rise to, newer type organizations in the news. I don't know who's going to come up. Here in Canada, we have, True North, and there's a lot of people have trouble with Rebel News. They have a past, but, I think they do some good work. Spencer Fernando, I think, has been doing some amazing stuff on Twitter. These are the real journalists asking the tough questions, because there's no one else doing that. So hopefully that's something good that'll come out of this. And hopefully we, as Canadians, although I'm not so optimistic about this, will finally develop a more adult distrust of authority. We have a very naive approach when it comes to our institutions, I think. But we shall see. Who knows what next month will bring.
I was going to ask you about vaccines, and it clearly seems that they're pushing to perhaps a mandatory vaccination program. I'm not exactly sure how that would work. Would you willingly go to the doctor and get yourself vaccinated for COVID-19 should such a vaccine be created?
I don't go willingly to the doctor to have a mole removed, so never mind a vaccine. I'm not an anti-vaxxer per se. This was difficult for us with our children. We objected to the schedule, having them jabbed so often in such a short period of time. Some we accepted. We sort of stretched out the period in between for their shots. Others we said, no, don't need that, don't want that. I'm not confident that a vaccine would work anyway. Everything I've read and heard from different virologists and immunologists say you don't get the type of immune response from a coronavirus. And even Dr. Fauci has basically said so. But the idea of a mandatory vaccine is odious. No, you can't. That just violates every norm and tenet of Western democracy. You can't do that. If they tried it in the States, I think there would be blood in the streets. I hope they're not dumb enough to try it up here.
I think it's done in a different way. It's more like having a credit card. You don't absolutely have to have a credit card, but you lose a lot of privileges when you don't.
Yes, yeah. I talked about the vaccine passport. They may try that.
Australia's already integrating many of these programs. They're basically cashless now because of the stigma around cash.
That's distressing to hear.
And contact tracing, and if you want to go to a concert, they've already said you're going to have an immunity passport, and you can just have a little barcode or something, and it'll zap you at the door.
Yeah, I could certainly see our leadership doing something like that up here, liberal or conservative, unfortunately. It might be time, if it comes to that, it might be time to pull up stakes and head for greener pastures.
And where would that be? Because you can't travel anymore anywhere. So when you say fight back, what does that even mean? Because people say it's time to bug out. Well, yeah, where are you going to go?
I'm keeping an eye on what's happening in the United States. If, God forfend, the radical left were to get in, that would be an option no longer viable, to head to the States. And I love the United States. I love American culture. I love their politics, their political system. I mean, and I love baseball. I'm emotionally invested in the United States. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love this country. I can't bear to see what's happening to it. And at a certain point, if it keeps going along the same trajectory, I have to ask, can I raise a family here? can we survive here? We have family in Greece. They've got a sort of a center-right government now that seems to be doing some smart things. So that's a possibility, I suppose. I mean, my preference is to stay put. So we shall see. We shall see.
Richard, tell me about Strange Planet.
Strange Planet is, it's the name of my production company, Strange Planet Productions. And so that's my website, strangeplanet.ca. And all of my projects can be found there. So I have my weekly syndicated radio show, The Conspiracy Show. I have a podcast called Conspiracy Unlimited. The YouTube channel, which basically live streams my weekly radio show, is there. I have a Strange Planet merch shop, and I have a free monthly newsletter called Inner Sanctum. All that's to be found at strangeplanet.ca.
And if they want to listen to your program, again, all that's on that website.
They can go to the Strange Planet YouTube channel. They can stream the show online at zoomerradio.ca. There's a Zoomer Radio app. There's so many ways to listen now. It's crazy.
So there's no excuse.
Absolutely none.
Listen to The Conspiracy Show, hosted by Richard Syrett, every Sunday night. Richard, thank you so much for being a guest on The Russell Scott Show. Had a good time.
Russell, my immense pleasure. Thank you.